And I'm just so glad to see all of you. I'm Diane English, and I'm with CBI. And this is our 6th Fault Line conversation in 2021. Standing together, supporting the AAPI community. And Christy will tell you a little bit more in a minute about what CBI means by fault lines, but it's really connected to CBI's mission, which thankfully we've developed a mission I can actually remember, so let's try it. Our purpose is to provide people and organizations, and this is for folks who don't know us, and it's a good reminder even for those of us who do. Our purpose is to provide people and organizations with knowledge, skills, and courage to fight bias, to remove barriers to opportunity, and to build more equitable and inclusive Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Did I get close? Okay, the elevator needs only about 4 floors for that mission, which is a gift and a half. So with that, we are today together. And we really thank you so much for accepting this invitation to meet 3 members of the AAPI community. Brian Heslin, who is on our board, Rona Chen, who we're just getting to know, thankfully, and Troy Leo, who we had a chance to be with for a year in Leaders Under 40. And Troy, as we know, kind of in the sidebar, we'll say about any of our programs, we'll mess with you for a year. And so we messed with Troy for a year, and he's still part of the CBI family. And so it wasn't so bad, was it? As a doctor, maybe we didn't burn the bridge. And we want all of you to feel like you can just settle back for the next hour and live into the truth of Patty Dye, who says, the shortest distance between 2 people is a story. And so what we're going to do today is share some stories. And we ask you to receive, respond, and engage. I also, as a member of CBI, I see a couple of additional board members on here with Brian, and one is Rick McDermott. Rick is in one of the little boxes, and Willie Ratchford. So we know we're in good hands, and we have a good crowd. So Christy, you want to take it next? Thanks.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We just continue to be so gratified that folks are interested in this fault lines idea and how we can flesh it out. Many of you who've been with us, or at least around for a few months, may remember that our December 2020 stakeholders breakfast was focused around fault lines and how we can each find our place in responding with hope and courage. And I just want to do a kind of a quick overview for anybody who's new about what we actually mean when we use that phrase, fault lines. It came to us sort of serendipitously because we had an actual earthquake in North Carolina late last summer. Some of you may remember, but we realized that geological fault lines really can serve as a great analogy for helping us get at some of the social fault lines that exist, things that are in the ground that we don't necessarily always see or may not even be aware of. Differences in perspective that once something happens, there's friction, things get stirred up. Those differences can pretty quickly divide us. And so we really offer this idea of fault lines as a more, we hope, more accessible way of understanding equity and what that could look like here in Charlotte. We also have really looked at this idea of fault zones. And geologically, fault zones are areas where many fault lines overlap or intersect. And so we really have kind of bridged that over to the social fault lines in thinking about the idea of intersectionality, where as identities are layered on top of each other, there can be multiple divisions in perspective or experience that keep us from really building community in an effective way. So I hope that gives you at least a general idea of what we mean by fault lines. We're really excited to have folks from the Asian American and Pacific Islander community with us today as an effort, as Diane said, to really share stories and how powerful identity can be in building community. I, without further ado then, will turn it over to our good friend and colleague, Joseph Johnson, excuse me, I put a T in there, Joseph, sorry about that. Joseph is an alum of our Equity Impact Circles program and also part of Mecklenburg County and a collaborative group called Partners for Racial Equity. And he's going to give you just a little context in terms of the work that the Partners for Racial Equity did to develop a statement of support. So Joseph, take it away.
Thank you, Chrisley. So one of the things that I would like to just share is what the Partners for Racial Equity is. It's a collaborative of Mecklenburg County, the City of Charlotte, Community Building Initiative, and Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. All of us coming together, and we really came together in response to the murder of George Floyd and developed a joint statement around that. Since that time, we understood that we as a group have a unique opportunity to engage with community in a way that is in alignment, in a way that really maximizes the resources and the opportunities that exist within each one of our organizations to engage with community in a very unique way specific to racial equity. And in that, one of the things that we have done so far is that we've created a few and have implemented a few workshops into the community where we had an opportunity to attain their feedback in regards to the inequities within government systems. We were in the process of developing additional workshops and opportunities to continue to engage with community. And one of the things that happened around March was the killing in Atlanta that appeared to be, and to us, was an assault on the AAPI community. And for that reason, we decided to really stop our planning around some of those workshops and really focus our attention on the drafting of a joint statement. That joint statement, given what was taking place at that time, really fueled, there was a lot of backing behind it amongst us as partners and then within our own respective institutions. And then upon our creating that joint statement and really putting it in the hands of the leaders within the City of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, the elected officials wanted to take it a step further. And then that is how we had both a joint statement and then a joint proclamation to really highlight that this is a crisis and that there needs to be a resolution to create a more harmonious and equitable environment and government. So one of the things that we as partners are doing is going back to that statement, both the AAPI statement we drafted this year, and then also the statement that we drafted in response to the killing of George Floyd, and going to continue in our development of community engagement opportunities to make sure that we're not just leaving our concern on paper, but that we're actually taking the necessary steps to continue to hear the concerns and voices of others and implement that into action.
Thanks so much for giving us that context and background, Joseph. I hope you all will notice Megan did put in the chat box a link to the statement. So if you haven't seen that, you can get that using that link. And then also the joint proclamation as well. We can give you a link to that. As many of you may know, CBI really believes in the power of stories and storytelling. And so we want to introduce you to three members of our Asian American Pacific Islander community. They're going to share just a really brief personal story to help highlight their lived experience as members of the community here in Charlotte. And then what we hope to do is have a little conversation involving everyone. Please, while they're talking, if you could just make sure to keep your audio muted. But if you have questions, please type those into the chat, and we'll do our best to make sure that we get to those before we move on to the next segment. So the folks I'd like to introduce and pass the baton to are CBI board member Brian Heslin, then Rona Chen, and Troy Leo. So Brian, thanks for being here. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, first I want to thank everyone. I'm honored to be able to speak with Rona and Troy today and tell a story, relating to the fault lines and the impact of increased racial tensions and violence towards Asians. And so, my story is really a story about my family, and in particular, my mother. And I tell this story in part because a lot of the assaults and violence that we've been seeing have been targeted at our elderly in the Asian community. And so, my mother, she came to this country when she was 13. Her father was a Filipino soldier during World War II, and he was captured along with the U.S. soldiers in the southern part of the island, one of the islands in Bataan. And he was, part of the Bataan Death March, that horrible event that the Japanese inflicted upon their POWs. But it just so happened that my grandfather, when he was being marched up the island, happened to be passing the province where he grew up. And so he saw an opportunity and he escaped, and they chased him, but he got away. And he spent the rest of the war, he reconnected with his family, and they helped nurse him back to health. And then he went and lived in the mountains and became one of those Filipino Rangers you may have heard of until the end of the war. As a result of his service in World War II, he was allowed to enlist in the U.S. Army. And that was really the key to the Santos family's citizenship in the U.S. By his enlistment and then his service. And he essentially spent the rest of his life in the Pacific, including serving in the Korean War, while his family was allowed to move to San Pedro, California. And that's where my mother landed. But, within my family's history, this idea of service for citizenship to essentially earn the right to, the American dream or being Americans is very, fairly strongly rooted. My mother's older brother served in Vietnam. He still suffers from PTSD. Her younger brother served, and her oldest son, I served with the same mentality. So fast forward, and my mother was a nurse her entire life, served the community. She married an Irish guy she met during the Vietnam conflict, and lived in Boston, and that's where we grew up. She was a big part of the community as a nurse, but in the recent months that led up to the election, she started feeling greater tensions around comments about the COVID, and it culminated for her. And if you think about the timing, she called me right after the January 6th uprising at the Capitol. And she told me she felt scared to walk around our neighborhood anymore. She used to take walks because she was very concerned based on the way people were looking at her, that she was going to be confronted when she saw those folks, who assaulted the Capitol and kind of their mentality towards other races and the rhetoric that had been going on politically. She felt very uncomfortable. That concern has only been exacerbated when the actual assaults started and have continued. And so it's a real sense of betrayal for my family that, no matter what you've done, because of how you look, you'll never, ever be completely accepted or be able to say that this is your country. And it's sad from the Asian perspective, because I have friends who are my peers who feel the same concern that they could be, or their kids or their families could be approached, could be assaulted for no reason but how they look. And so that's something that we are living with now. It's not necessarily anything brand new, but it seems like it's been happening a lot more. So, and I will say this too, it's not just the white nationalists and supremacists that we saw on January 6th. These assaults are happening by other ethnic minorities, which if you're an Asian makes you feel even more isolated in the community. So that's my story. I wanted to make sure I kept in the time limit, but so thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thanks so much, Brian. Rona Chen, good morning.
Good morning. I was just privately messaging Megan. I was like, do I answer these questions separately or do I kind of bulk them all together? I had no idea because I had planned my responses separately. So I think that's how I'll do it. But I wanted to thank you for inviting me to be your guest speakers. I'm certainly honored to have this opportunity and deeply grateful because I always remain humble and modest. So I just want to share with you today that everything I say will be raw, authentic, and vulnerable. So thank you for being open-minded and listening to my story. Being firstborn Taiwanese American in Charlotte has shaped my experience and perspective in a profound way. I was born and raised in East Charlotte near the former Eastern Mall area, for those of you who know. And I am multicultural and bilingual, raised in a strict household. My mother immigrated here for family unification around 1982. She originally came to visit her sister. And it was here where my mother met my father and later had my sister and I. My childhood wasn't privileged with luxuries and my memories were painful. My parents spoke limited English and we were recipients of welfare. My family did the best that they could to make ends meet, despite our unpredictable financial circumstances. In school, I was always outgoing and just an overall well-rounded, seemingly happy child. My personality was vivacious and I excelled academically. And I poured my heart and soul into music and fine arts, playing the piano and the clarinet. But I did that to compensate for the tears at home. So I was at home, I was being abused, particularly by Peter, who is my father. My parents, they always fought over money or the lack thereof. My mother was a stay-at-home wife and Peter couldn't keep a stable job. So we lived in a moderate to low household income area. And whenever an argument ensued, usually over money, my natural protective instincts and quick reflexes kind of kicked in. And this is where I jumped in front of my mother to shield her. And I ended up beaten to a pulp. And as a result, suffered from many injuries and scars from this. Now the problem runs much deeper and it's had psychological effects on my ability to love and to trust people. Fast forward time though, I am a strong-minded single woman, single mother of two uniquely different children. They are entirely polar opposites. My son is 17 and just graduated yesterday from Ardrey Kell, and my daughter is 14, a rising sophomore. I'm also the legal guardian and caretaker of my mother, who is now permanently disabled. She had a stroke 6 months after my son was born. Today, my multicultural and family values are deeply rooted in my daily principles, which is to carry myself with an optimistic mind, an authentic personality, and a nurturing heart. So taking care of my family, all my responsibilities, without any outside support, it really developed a sense of grit, discipline, and gratitude. So I guess you can say my humble beginnings inspired this kind of relentless self-pursuit for self-improvement. and to foster a forgiving heart of kindness and love. Now, what I just shared with you, it's entirely unlike or different than what the typical model minority usually sounds like. By definition, a model minority is someone that's educated, high income, homogenous, hardworking, and just financially successful. But my childhood story in itself tells you that's blatantly not true and a false reality. My son, by no means, is a model minority. So, although I am very proud of him, growing up, raising him was always a challenge. And I don't say that lightly, because at a young age, he was diagnosed with ADHD and ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. He would always be disrespectful, disobedient. He skipped school. He did drugs. And he was just very narcissistic. And my son, he would just lie, cheat, steal, and did whatever it takes to get whatever he wanted. He didn't grow up with a father, so I know that contributed to his mental health and behavioral health problems. But I was always so angry. And more than likely, in retrospect, I was embarrassed because I didn't raise him to be that way. So for that stigma, that stereotype on me, and for our Asian American community looking at me, it was just such a paradox. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I felt hopeless. My son, he kind of hung out with the wrong kids at school. And I know that that was a bad influence on him. But I knew he was talented. He was very skilled and coordinated with his hands, with drawing. And I noticed that at a young age. Around 7 years old, I used to buy him those 500-piece plus Lego sets. And normally it would take a typical person a couple of hours to complete them. My son, he looked at the manual, and then within an hour or less, he finished the entire set. And I was like, wow, this boy's got some talent. Now, it wasn't until last year, that's when I finally accepted my son for who he was. I stopped fighting him. I stopped trying to mold him and change him to be that model minority. And that's the fault line in our community. I finally realized that I need to embrace him, his interest, and his strengths. So I learned that my son is a very entrepreneurial, independent, and money-driven child. So he worked the entire school year at Hungry Howie's and Panera Bread. And I discovered that now he's working to save up money to purchase his first car and rent an apartment. And next year, he'll be pursuing a trade school, and he'll be learning how either to become an electrician or a plumber. And I fully support that because four-year college is not in his books. So, but that's the reality that my son lives and that my family lived, that I lived. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
Rona, thank you for being so real and so raw and helping bust that myth for us.
Thank you.
Dr. Troy Leo, good morning.
Good morning. So I want to say, one, to echo Brian said, I'm just honored to be here. And Christy, I have to say I'm extremely upset with you because following Rona is impossible. That was just amazing and heartfelt. So I apologize for being the person that has to follow that. You know, I want to say first, I think this is just amazing. I never thought, honestly, and this is part of the problem, that there would even be people talking about Asian Americans and that we matter and that there are even problems, because for most of my life, we were invisible. And the fact that this is a thing is amazing. That there are almost 50 people here on this call is just great to see. So I want to thank you all for being here. You know, my story is fairly typical for a lot of the people that, I've talked to about this. So I grew up in Ohio. I grew up in Cleveland. My parents immigrated from Burma in the 70s, and we grew up kind of in Midwest Ohio, as you can imagine, the only Burmese family in Cleveland. And, I went to a Catholic school, predominantly white. My parents really cared about our education. And so, we lived in this world where everything that they kind of showed us and taught us was how to fit in. So they didn't speak Burmese around us because they wanted us to speak English. When I had friends come over, we wouldn't cook Burmese food because it would smell funny, because we wanted my friends to know, like, oh no, we eat macaroni and cheese and pizza just like you. And I spent a lot of my identity trying to fit in. And part of that, which is, as I've grown older and realized, which is really sad, is that I pushed my Asian identity away as much into a corner as I could, because I just wanted to be honest, as white as possible. So I fit in with everyone else at school. And that was most of my childhood. Was really not being myself, not accepting, my heritage, and really saying, how can I be like everyone else? How can I fit in the best I can? I juxtapose that with the neighborhood I grew up in, which was predominantly African-American. And so my best friend was Black, and I grew up in his community too. And so that was great. But again, I always try to fit in. And what I realized was, no matter how much I tried to fit in, I wasn't white enough for the white people, and I was never brown enough for the brown people. And that's a really isolating thing. And I think Brian touched on that, is I think as an Asian American, you in some ways try to fit in with everyone because you're the smallest group that's there. I grew up as the only Asian person in my school, so there wasn't anyone really else that looked like me or that talked like me or had food that smelled like mine. And so I spent all this time trying to fit in. And while you kind of fit in a little bit, at the end of the day, you weren't enough to be in one group and you weren't enough to be in the other group. And you kind of stood alone at the end of the day. And as I grew older and started working, and I, traveled across the country and finally ended up here in Charlotte, I joke, as much as I tried to break the minority, I still turned into a doctor. So I didn't help that at all. But the funny thing about it is, no matter how hard I studied, no matter what I did, still to this day, whether it's people in social settings or when I'm at work, one of the first questions I get is, where are you from? And as I answer Cleveland, I get but where are you from? And what it shows is that no matter what I do, no matter what I accomplish, no matter all the things that are about me, I can't escape that people look at me as not being them first. Whether they're white, whether they're African American, whether they're Hispanic, they look at me as not like them first, and then all the rest second. And that's, I think, hard. I think, when I talk to a lot of my Black friends, a lot of people don't ask them where they're from, because they just assume they're American. And no matter what I do, and, I've got nieces now that are biracial, they still get asked the question, where are you from? Where are you from? And all it does is reinforce to people that you're pointing out to them that you don't belong here. You're here, but, there's something different about you. And so as I think through the fault lines through our society, I think, that's one of the biggest ones, is that, this lens of Asian Americans is like, no matter what we do, no matter how Brian and his family have served for our country, they're still not looked at as pure Americans, as pure people that belong here. And that's really hard, I think, for our community. And for one thing that we've got to help get over. And I think the other thing is what Rona talked about, this idea of the model minority. Again, I say that facetiously as I sit in my doctor's office. But if you look at Asian Americans, there's this idea that every Asian American is hardworking, makes a lot of money, and they're good, nice people. When you actually look at the numbers, they're not true. Burmese you know, people in the United States. Actually, you know, my heritage, the average household income is $45,000 a year. It's one of the lowest in the United States. We have a large Burmese immigrant population here in Charlotte. And so when I'm at work now, one of the challenges that I fight is one of the, you know, I'm at Atrium Health, and I think it's amazing a lot of the work that we're working for in diversity and underserved populations. But I'll be honest, those conversations are mainly focused on the African American and Hispanic communities. And I have to remind people that the Asian community also is very underrepresented and financially insecure, because people don't think of us that way. They only think of the versions of me, right? And there's a very large population here of immigrants in Charlotte that need our help. And I think as we think through a lot of the social issues and equity, we can't forget about them, because I think it's really easy to forget about them. So anyways, that's my story. Happy to talk more. Just glad that everyone's here.
Troy, thank you so much. And thanks again to Brian, Rona, and Troy for really fully bringing who you are to this conversation today. What we'd like to do now, just for maybe 15 or 20 minutes of our remaining time, is just have some conversation in smaller groups. As many of you will know, we like to do at CBI. We're going to put you in a group and make you talk early in the morning. So get your coffee, get ready. There will be a moderator in the group, but certainly be sure you talk to each other and not to the moderator. We're just going to be in each group to, you know, manage time. This is really an opportunity for you to connect with each other and meet some new folks that maybe you didn't know before. So Megan, are we ready to roll?
We are. And understand group 4, I'm going to put myself there, but I'll probably be 30 seconds late making sure everyone else gets to their rooms first. So don't panic.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope the other groups had great conversation like my small group did. Before we jump to kind of next steps, and Annetta, I just want to leave you, I'm not sure how far folks got in their conversations, but just want to leave you with another question to think about, kind of food for thought, which is really personally, how can you be more courageous in building relationships with folks in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community here? And I'll just leave that as a head and a heart question as we transition. Annetta's gonna wrap us up and give you a few resources and some ideas of what might be next. Annetta.
Thanks, Christy. Before I get into the next steps, I think, Rona, you had some brief information that you wanted to share about an organization.
Yes, I certainly did. So for those of you who don't know, I am Rona Chen. I also serve on the board with the Charlotte International Cabinet. And I don't know if you've seen around the city, but I led a public awareness campaign in collaboration with the city of Charlotte. And there are 15 wrapped buses that says "Stop Asian Hate, We Are One." Can anybody raise their hand or tell me if they've seen it? Woohoo! I see Troy. Yes. Yes, I see Troy's thumbs up. Okay. I see Miss Chris. Awesome. So this, I had commissioned an artist and who created 2 designs. They were powerful, thought-provoking designs. And the first one is a mural that's wrapped around 15 CATS buses. And then the second one will be a decal. And I'm actually going to pick up this decal today, but 400 have been printed. And I would like to request volunteer groups to help me distribute them to all local business owners and shopping centers. But the purpose of this campaign was that I wanted others to know that Charlotte is our home too, and that we embrace our brothers and sisters of all colors and all marginalized groups. So the purpose of me was to help amplify the voices of the unheard and underreported hate crimes, and just to lift up bring more visibility to the Asian American community, because honestly, seeing is believing. So I'm sure whenever you guys saw those bus wraps, you got really excited and felt very proud or heartwarmed, because I certainly did. But I just wanted to go beyond performative activism, and I wanted to seek tangible results. So that's why I did this. And I will submit a online link, registration link, if you guys would like to come out and help me distribute them. Thank you.
Thank you, Rona, for that information. So what's next? You will notice in the chat that it has now been populated with organizations, with links to those organizations that you may know about, may not have known about, that we would like for you to feel free to explore. One of the organizations, of course, is CBI. We invite you to visit our website at cbicharlotte.org to find out about all of the ways that we seek to give you information about things to do here in Charlotte. One of the things for sure I want to lift up is our Curiosity Tour, which is a walking tour that you could do on your own or with a group of family or friends, now that outside has opened up a little bit. And our virtual bus tours, which we are still doing, which is the history of how Charlotte came to be. And one of the things that just struck me about a bus tour slide that we use as we're having this conversation is the slide that shows the FHA slide, where the groups are listed in order. And the thing that jumps out to most everybody when that slide is shown is that Asians are not on there. Native Americans are not on there. So, this is historical. This is, it's happening today. We're having this conversation today, but it didn't just start today. So thanks again, guys, for sticking around with us. I think Diane has some information to just wrap us up. But there is information in the chat with various links that we invite you to explore.
Thanks so much, Annette, and thanks to each of you. We are so grateful. You can have a great program, you can have great presenters, but and we could have had a great conversation with the 6 of us or the 7 of us, but it's so much more meaningful when others, and what we would say, if the stories land somewhere inside you, see how they emerge. And you'll find ways to share them or just to let them live inside you for a while. And the opportunities to build on them will present themselves. It's all around us. So the other thing we'd like to offer, we found out, most great conversations take place in a parking lot. And that was especially true when we used to be able to gather in a building. And then the really good things, right, Namal, would happen in the parking lot. And you'd write down those important notes on the back of a deposit slip. And, that's where the good stuff was. So if you want to hang around, we'll leave the Zoom room open and we've done this before. Hang around and we'll just chat for a little bit more, 15 minutes max. And, you know, if you have to bolt and run, some of you already have, we so understand. But sincere thanks to the CBI team who had this vision, seated by our board member, Brian Heslin, and the work of the Partners for Racial Equity. And then the good fortune, the exceptional good fortune, to invite Rona Chen and Troy Leo to join us today. We cannot express or thank you enough. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And you know where CBI is. We're just kind of everywhere. And because we live in the hearts and the minds and the work of people. And those are exactly people like you. So hang around, head into the parking lot. Okay, thanks.
Thank you all so much for being here.